Eren Ozmen has built Sierra Nevada Corporation into the nation's largest female-owned defense contractor. Eren is also one of 400 billionaires on this year's Forbes 400, and my colleague Monica Hunter-Hart has an inside look at a $13 billion deal Eren just struck to build a nuclear-ready Doomsday plane. Hi everyone, I'm Maggie McGrath, editor of Forbes Women. Joining me now is my colleague, reporter Monica Hunter-Hart. Monica, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
This is a fabulous story, and let's break it all down. Who is Eren Ozmen? How much is she worth? Where is she on the Forbes 400?
Yeah, okay, so Eren Ozmen, or Eren Ozmen, she's the 335th richest woman or richest person in the United States at the moment. She's worth $4 billion, and along with her husband, Fatih Ozmen, she runs Sierra Nevada Corporation, SNC, an aerospace defense contractor. She's got this really interesting story that I can go into a bit. She's basically a Turkish immigrant, so she was born in a really beautiful city called Izmir on the western coast of Turkey, grew up in the southeastern part of the country in Diyarbakir, moved to Ankara for school, and there she met Fatih, her future husband, who was actually, kind of fun fact, a national cycling champion for the country.
Okay.
Kind of wild. And then they, just met briefly there. They both immigrated separately to the United States, and reconnected in California. Fatih basically convinced her to get a business degree at the University of Nevada at Reno. They went there together as grad students, bonded really strongly, and became best friends, she says, and then eventually dated. After graduation, Fatih got a job as an intern there at SNC, kind of moved up the ranks, became an engineer. And Eren joined the company a bit later. She was a financial consultant. And yeah, they actually kind of went through a rough period there with the company. They basically watched it struggle from kind of contract to contract. It was really struggling financially. Eren automated all of their financials, their financial systems, and was giving them advice, but wasn't really able to, I guess didn't have enough control to kind of get them to a financially stable place. So they were just struggling along for many years. And eventually the couple decided that they were kind of just sick of watching that and not really having the power to do much more about it. So they actually bought the company. They borrowed against their home to buy the company in 1994, for less than $5 million. Today, SNC is worth, per our estimates, $4 billion. So wild growth there. Together they own 87% of the company. Eren owns 51% of that stake. Fatih owns 49%. It's the largest female-owned defense contractor in the country. And they also own a couple of other companies as well, affiliates. They own Sierra Space, a space technologies company, which has a really cool project called the Dream Chaser space plane. We probably don't have time to get into that today, but you should look it up. And then DAG, Deutsche Aircraft Group, a German aircraft manufacturer.
They have Dreamcatcher, but...
Dream Chaser, yeah.
Sorry, Dream Chaser. I was going to make a play on words because you have been talking to them recently about a deal for Doomsday planes. A little bit,
a little darker name,
conceptually, a little darker.
Yeah, actually,
but it's a $13 billion contract that she secured, and you kind of have an inside look at what happened here. So let's just start at the top.
Yeah.
What is this deal? Why is it significant?
Yeah. So, okay. So it's called the SAOC contract, the Survivable Airborne Operations Center. So you're basically building or developing the next Doomsday plane, they often call it, yes, as you mentioned, for the Air Force, often also called the Night Watch plane. And these are colloquial terms, by the way. This is not, what the Air Force calls them. It's the current model of this plane is the E-4B. That's the official name.
Okay. What makes these planes special, by the way? Why are they called Doomsday planes?
Yeah, so, they're meant to protect you against a doomsday scenario. By you, that basically means, in the event of a nuclear attack or some other kind of national emergency, it would enable survivable communications between the president, the Secretary of Defense, and the armed forces. It's equipped with over 40 communication systems. It's hardened against radiation, against the electromagnetic pulse that would, in the event of a nuclear attack, short circuit electronics within range. There's nothing you can really do to protect a plane against the kind of if you're in the fireball of the nuke, but in most other scenarios, it's meant to enable this plane to keep running. And so if you kind of imagine, let's say President Vladimir Putin were to launch a surprise attack, a surprise nuclear attack against the United States. By some estimates, a nuke could hit the Capitol in 6 to 8 minutes. We currently have 4 of these Doomsday planes, and they can be airborne within just a few minutes' notice. So there's always one on alert. And then I think the other important part about this particular contract is that they're not building a plane from scratch. So they're actually retrofitting, remodeling a used Boeing 747-8I plane.
Okay.
And this is a really cool plane, a kind of iconic plane, actually. So the 747, when it was kind of unveiled to the public in the mid-20th century, was so big it was known as the kind of jumbo jet, the queen of the skies. And if you, for example, did a transatlantic flight, in the maybe late 20th century, early 21st century, on a big plane, 500 plus people, there's a great chance that you were on one of these things. It had 4 engines, which is not so good for current airline travel because you can use a much cheaper kind of twin engine jet now. Mm-hmm. But it's great for a wartime scenario because it provides extra redundancy. So if one of the engines is blown out, you have more.
Right.
So they're actually being retired from passenger use at the moment. So there are only about 50 left. But if you'll allow me, Maggie, just a kind of quick example, let's say you took one of these transatlantic flights at some point, and then let's say that, you experienced a nuclear attack. What you would have experienced is basically, radiation getting sucked into the cabin, you're breathing it in, you're not in good shape, and then that immediately frying the plane's electronics and basically careening the plane to the ground. So horrific scenario. That's the baseline that SNC is starting from here, which is just kind of wild to think about. They're taking that plane and need to basically make that plane more or less nuclear proof.
So basically the government says we have 4 of these Doomsday planes, but we want to retrofit these Boeing machines, these Boeing aircrafts into Doomsday planes so we have more. Right? Is it adding to the fleet?
So the current planes are also Boeing planes, but it's going to be taking actually much newer planes that were probably made, we don't know exactly which ones they are, but they were some of the last 747s ever made, and retrofitting those commercial aircraft. Taking them out, the current ones are actually, they just bought them from Korea Airlines, so they're currently being used right now to carry passengers back and forth from places like Seoul to Atlanta, taking those and then retrofitting those much newer planes.
So the government says we want to retrofit these planes, we're opening bids for a contract, so it's not a done deal that Eren Ozmen's SNC wins this bid, right? So they're going up against competition, I imagine?
Right.
Who was their competition in winning this $13 billion deal?
Yeah, it was Boeing. They were the only other company to bid on this, and they were kind of considered shoo-ins for the contract for many reasons, in part because Boeing, the original planes, the existing Doomsday planes, they're Boeing planes. Boeing created these in the 70s. It's been maintaining them ever since. Boeing is currently making about $150 million per year maintaining these. Also, Boeing is it's an experienced contractor in this space. It's the largest, most successful aerospace company in the world. It's maybe $78 billion in sales last year. S&C comparatively is $2 billion. Imagine it just won this $13 billion contract. I mean, it's such an escalation. So Boeing has way more experience in that sense of doing projects at this scale. It's also currently doing something very similar with Air Force One, the U.S. Presidential aircraft. It's also taking 747s and retrofitting used commercial aircraft, or use those used commercial aircraft to create the next generation of Air Force One. That project is not going so well for Boeing, at least in some senses. It is actually losing $2 billion so far and counting on those. So that could be one potential reason of many that we can get into about why Boeing was not ultimately chosen for this.
Interesting. But ultimately what you have here with $78 billion in revenue versus $2 billion in revenue, Boeing and SNC respectively, is a little bit of a David and Goliath situation. So Eren Ozmen is really facing a giant, and she wins this contract. What did she do? What did she say to help her be successful here?
Yeah. And I mean, I think it's important to to say that it's not like S&C is coming out of nowhere. I mean, they are still a large company, and they have been successful for many years, but they were really in this kind of mid-tier of defense contractors is the kind of way that the industry describes this. Boeing is kind of a tier 1 company. So in terms of what they did, there are a few points maybe we can get into. One, I guess, is that Boeing basically submitted a bid for this contract that was non-compliant, at least according to my reporting. That's what people are telling me, which means that the Air Force basically put forth some really tough terms. I'm hearing over and over the Air Force is a really tough customer. So they ask for, not the impossible, but they ask for things that are really difficult to pull off. In this case, there were two things that Boeing was basically not willing to agree to, and S&C was willing to agree to. One is the kind of relinquishing of an intellectual property rights. So Boeing owns the original design data for the existing Doomsday planes because it made them, and it did not give that data to the government. So it has basically been able to compel the government to continue to hire them for this maintenance work that I mentioned earlier. Again, like $150 million a year at this point. That's very common in this sector. For people to kind of cling to their IP because it can be this really lucrative revenue source for them. And it leads to something called vendor lock, which often it also leads to a really highly consolidated defense sector, which has been really criticized. There are lots of antitrust concerns about, a lack of competition, maybe overly inflated contract prices, which, the kind of burden of that is then passed down to the taxpayer. So Boeing wanted to do the same thing here. They wanted to hold on to the IP. S&C said, we are okay with not doing that. We would prefer that the government come back to us and hire us again to do that maintenance work because they want to. Voluntarily, they think that we did such a good job that they choose us,
Right.
So that's one. There's also a fixed price component to this contract. A fixed price structure basically means that, there's a pre-agreed upon cost for how much, it is thought to, how much this contract is presumed to cost. And then if it goes, if there are price overruns, basically the contractor needs to assume all of the extra costs. So not ideal, obviously, for a contractor. That is the exact kind of pricing structure that Boeing agreed to for Air Force One. That's one of the big reasons it's been losing billions. Boeing said last year, we are not doing that again. It's also, had a similar issue with many other contracts. And so it's way more than $2 billion that they've lost altogether. They have said, we are not doing any more fixed price contracts. We're taking a step back. That is simply too much. S&C, on the other hand, said, we are willing to do that. It's also important to say that that's not such a big part of the pricing structure of this contract. It is a minority portion. So the details of the contract are highly classified. We don't know a lot about them. I have a FOIA request out. I'm hoping to get more details, but right now all we really know is it's a minority of the contract. It's probably it is certainly just for the production stage. So that's much better than fixed price all the way through, like the contract for Air Force One, especially because that initial kind of development stage is very uncertain. You go into a plane, you're designing something for the first time, you don't know what it's going to involve or how much it's going to cost, really. So it's a small fixed price portion, but it's still, that involves some risk. So
Right.
Boeing didn't want to take that on. One small last thing there is just that S&C does have decades of experience doing, modifying existing aircraft, integrating existing aircraft with new technologies. So that is what they're doing here. In some ways, they're a really great fit for this project. In many ways, they're a really great fit for this project. And they kind of doubly proved their capability to the Air Force by pulling bold maneuvers like, when they decided to bid for this, they went out and they went to the Air Force's backyard in Dayton, Ohio, and they basically, at the airport there, very close to the Air Force base there, built a conspicuously 747-sized hangar there, within which they would be doing this work, theoretically. So even before they won the contract, they built a hangar that was big enough to hold a 747 that they didn't have before, and then went to the Air Force and said, see, we are so prepared. We can start pretty much immediately. We are so ready for this. You should just let us do it.
That's like dressing for a party and then running into the party host at the grocery store. And
oh my God.
Oh, you're hosting a party? I'm so ready.
It's exactly like that.
A very layperson's analogy, right? But
Yeah.
they were basically saying, we're ready. We can do this.
Yeah.
And that was Eren's idea. I'm interested in her leadership here because
Yeah.
it does feel like there were certain structural and environmental benefits she had, right?
Yeah.
There are innovations that SNC has developed.
Yeah.
She showed she was ready. Meanwhile, you have Boeing, which has had, to put it mildly, some PR problems this year.
Yes.
And its own struggles. What's the balance, do you think, between Boeing having difficulties and Eren Ozmen having the right ideas in getting this contract? Like, is it more of the positive or is it more of the negative?
I mean, I do think it's both. It's hard for me to say. I do think that the issues that Boeing has had this year, maybe most infamously with the 737 MAX door plug flying off of the Alaska Airlines flight, coming out of Portland in January. Although that actually happened after they were eliminated from this competition, but they've been having 737 problems for a long time, and CEOs leaving, et cetera. They're not in a good place at the moment. Surely that had an impact here. But I don't want to overstate that too much. I also think SNC has been, kind of coming up in the world for a long time. I think the idea of building this hangar was a pretty brilliant one. They've also spent $175 million so far. They're planning on spending much more and kind of upgrading their digital infrastructure. They have some really cool ideas about what they're going to do in building and developing this plane, and we can maybe get into that a little bit. And I do think Eren, had a big role in that. She and Fatih they kind of split the duties of the company, so they can, we can put this at the feet of both of them, and of course the entirety of SNC. Fatih is a little bit more kind of strategy and growth focused. So I think he was actually the one who had the idea of, let's go for bigger projects than we've been going for in the past, and he kind of challenged the leadership of SNC to go bigger. That happened about 5 years ago, and then the team kind of realigned and started shooting for SAOC, this Doomsday contract. Eren is a little bit more of the kind of running the company in a more traditional sense. Maybe she oversees all governance. She is responsible for the financial stability of the company. So that's probably heartening to, she's a lot of, and we talked about kind of the early history of SNC. She's really good at making sure that, they're solvent, they're in a really great financial place. And given that this is going to be such a kind of difficult contract with lots of technical and managerial challenges and financial difficulties, I think she's probably a great person to kind of be at the helm.
You mentioned some technological innovations, just real quick and possibly high level, because I'm sure you got really in the weeds, but what do you think are the biggest innovations that SNC brings to this project? Yeah.
So they're basically going to be coming in and creating a digital twin of the plane, which is something that it's a kind of newish technology that's more common for kind of creating new planes, not as common for redeveloping planes. So SNC invested in this very early. They're going in, they're kind of scanning the plane, creating a series of digital models that are going to be stacked on top of each other, a digital twin. So they don't even think they're going to have to touch the plane for a long time, which will help kind of minimize contact with the kind of Boeing original design data, hopefully saving them money and effort. Once they've done that, then they kind of go back in and they create, so SNC refers to it as the equivalent of the studs out remodel of your home. So they're going down, they're stripping the plane down to the basics, kind of to the studs. They're creating an interface, kind of like the drywall, and then they're integrating it with a lot of systems that are coming from subcontractors, actually. So General Electric will be doing the engines, Lockheed Martin will be doing the refueling systems.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so they're kind of fundamentally a systems integrator here, actually. And then at the end, they will have the new home, and the blueprint for that will be the kind of data that they are relinquishing to the Air Force.
So this is just the beginning of the contract. It's over 12 years, is that correct?
2036, so yeah.
Is success, we've talked about the innovations and the things that they're doing right, but is success guaranteed, and what does success look like for SNC? What does it do to their revenue? What does it do to their reputation?
Yeah, great question. I mean, if they don't lose money, that's pretty good. I think regardless, even if they don't lose money, even if they break even, an analyst, Lauren Thompson, who's a longtime aerospace analyst, put it to me this way, this heralds the emergence of a major new U.S. aerospace enterprise. Another analyst, Kai von Rumor, said, they're moving up in the food chain. So their reputation is already improved because of this. They're probably going to get many more contracts, especially if they prove that they're more than capable of doing this. They just won another very notable contract called Hades, developing long-range spy planes for the Army, That was in August, a few months after winning the original contract. So yeah, they're hoping to basically just ride that momentum, keep getting new exciting contracts, double their revenue to $2 billion by 2025, triple in size by 2030. They say that they're already on target to hit those goals. So, even with the existing contracts they've already won, so that could even be potentially a conservative estimate. So it's a big deal.
What would failure look like, and what would that mean for SNC?
Yeah, maybe even harder to define. Many analysts told me, they don't think this will cause SNC to go bankrupt or to completely, fail. But it would definitely be painful if they end up losing a substantial amount of money on this. So there's a risk of, financial risk, and then there's also a kind of, this could go over schedule. And in the aerospace defense world, often projects do go over schedule, and they often are over budget. SNC is known for being very nimble, very quick, and good at those things. So, maybe that won't happen here. Hopefully it won't. But there is, to some degree, a risk. SNC will surely make it out on the other side, but it could be, to some degree, a reputational hit, or maybe slow their growth.
Obviously, aerospace and defense is a highly specialized space. There can be a lot of jargon. I think for the general public, you don't get a lot of exposure to it. So what was most interesting to you? What most excited you in reporting out this story?
Yeah. I think to me, it's interesting seeing the success, the kind of unlikely success of a mid-tier company coming up against, such a big entity like Boeing. I think that's exciting. It's really cool seeing this this woman who's an immigrant be so successful in the U.S. national defense space. And then I think it's just, even though I'm very new to kind of the aerospace defense world, learning about how consolidated it is at this point, the fact that SNC has been so successful here so far. It's a big deal. And there was an analyst named Cynthia Cook from CSIS, the Center for Strategic and International Studies, who put it very well. She said, competition increases performance across the entire industrial base. So the fact that SNC is going in there, proving that a smaller entity, can have a shot. It might encourage other kind of mid-tier companies to throw their hat in the ring, potentially increasing competition across the entire sector, improving things for the taxpayer, for the government, for our national defense.
Interesting. So you mentioned at the beginning of the conversation some of the competitive concerns that people have, the antitrust argument. So this could be the start of a new generation in aerospace and defense, perhaps?
Exactly, yeah.
Interesting.
We'll see.
We'll see. Did you get to go in any planes? What was your on-the-ground reporting process like for this? I
did not go in any planes. I might have a chance to go on a Doomsday plane next year. I'm not even sure if I should say that. We'll see. It's highly, highly classified, so they don't really want people kind of poking their noses into it too much.
Well, for your sake, I hope you get a look at those planes. I'm curious to get on the inside of those planes. I don't know if I'd want to go up in the sky in them, though it sounds pretty safe.
As safe as it can get, I guess, yeah.
Monica, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your
Maggie.
story. And I encourage everyone to find it and read it on Forbes.com. Thank you so much.
Thank you.